Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I want to talk about how to spin yarn from felted roving. This is usually something that is a complete mistake. Maybe when you are washing the yarn, washing the roving, you rubbed it too vigorously, and instead of your fluffy roving, you have something that feels very much like a rope. This is something that even once we fix it, it's still going to be pretty hard to draft from, but you can create some kind of thick and thin yarn and get a yarn out of it. It might be different from what you intended, but I think you can still get something that is spinnable and knittable. And so I'm going to talk to you about how I did it. My friend Liz sent me the first roving that she dyed for a super special surprise spin-along. And unfortunately, it arrived felted. But in the live stream, I was able to spin this yarn as I had mentioned, and I decided to save the other half to do a pre-filmed video so that way I could sort of condense and share the way I did it with you at home. This roving is, doesn't feel very draftable. It feels very much like a rope. But in that live stream, I was able to fluff it out. And here we have something that it's still lightly felted, it's still not necessarily draftable, but with a little effort, you can start to pull it apart. So then you might get something that's a little more usable. So usually if there's felting, the end tip is going to be the most felted spot. So I'm not going to really start at the very end. But if you start a little bit further away from it, you can start to try to pull it open a bit. I suppose this could potentially break some fibers, but at first you can see there's almost like a seam that I'm able to open up. And it's revealing some fluffy, still sort of ordered. You can see that the fibers are still going in mostly the same direction. If I flip it over, you're going to want to continue fluffing to the best of your ability. I think that this purple might be more felted than the gray that I had used before, but even when you go to the more felted edge, you can start fluffing that a bit as well. And so the goal is to get as much of the yarn sort of fluffed and separated as possible. Because then we will be sort of sectioning it so that way we can spin. I do not believe that this will be draftable. So here I'm at a part where I'm having trouble even just starting to pull it apart. So I'm going to go further down and find a space where maybe I can start to open it up. And there we go. You can see that this is not easy. I am definitely struggling. So it's really up to you if you decide that this is worth it. There we go. If you want to try doing this. And in this case, I definitely want to try. It's sort of a challenge. But, this is going to be fairly slow going. So where did the felting happen? Like what could be done to avoid this? And I think that when it comes to dyeing roving, the place where new dyers are most likely to felt their fiber is in the washing step. I have been lucky and I haven't ended up with something this felted on my own, but I think that it's in that stage when you're washing and squeezing and stuff that you can give that agitation that results in the felting. So I just would like to caution people to, when you're washing your fiber, try to do maybe less while it's wet. And if you're going to spin it yourself, even if there's still some dye runoff, try to maybe wait, and then at the end, once you've spun your yarn, then you can do some more rinsing. But so here's this tip that was, initially I avoided. And now I don't know if I'm going to be able to get all the way up to that tip, but I am sort of able to uncase this and reveal something that is much more usable within. Our goal is to get something, is to be able to section this into, I guess it's not quite going to be pencil roving, but something pencil roving-esque, so then you can spin it. I just spent about 5 minutes off camera fluffing up the rest. I did sort of time myself so that way I could let you know how long it was. I mean, it does take effort. My arms, they're not sore, but I can tell that I was putting through some effort. There are areas that are not, you know, perfect, and that as I go and start separating this, I will probably need to do some more fluffing. But this doesn't quite resemble a nice undyed roving, but there's no question that it is fluffier, and it's starting to resemble roving more than rope, which means we are headed in the right direction. To prepare for spinning, the goal is to get this sort of as thin and pre-drafted as possible. So this is pretty thick. And you know, even like this, it's too felted, I can't draft it. So I'm even going to try to separate this out even more. And now I'm starting to get something, so I can sort of draft this a little bit, but it takes some effort, and if you pull too hard, then you end up separating it. So the goal now is to separate it into smaller and smaller pieces. So with this first one, I'm sort of sectioning it off down the whole length, and okay, here, I'll go to a portion and then just try to remove it. There, okay. And you know, I have something here that if this were really draftable, I would be able to just spin this. I typically like to pre-draft. That's just sort of the way I prefer to do things. Now this edge is definitely the quote hardest part. And the reason why it'll be thick and thin is that, like, here I'm getting a section that is reasonably fluffy, and I feel that yeah, like some of this like could be drafted, but the goal is to get as many pieces like this as I can, so then once we go to try to start spinning, then we don't end up with something too thick. But yeah, don't expect to draft. The goal today is to take something that feels unusable and to find a way to use it. And so, yeah, I'm going to keep sectioning this into small pieces. So when we're eventually ready to start spinning, and here's a piece that feels somewhat draftable. When we're ready to start spinning, it's going to go fast because there's going to be minimal drafting. Even though some pieces feel fluffier, then there are these pieces that definitely won't be able to pull through very well. But this is sort of going through it a second time to open things up as much as I can. I think that there's another benefit to doing this all at once. I remember when I was spinning the gray one that sometimes I would get a little frustrated because I couldn't draft and it was a lot of effort. But prepping the fiber all at once actually is a bit easier. And some of these areas can be drafted a little bit, but I think the problem is then you hit a spot where it's a bit more felted, so you can't draft it. So then you end up pulling too hard and it breaks, which was frustrating while I was spinning. So I think that getting it thinner while I'm sitting at the wheel, I want to pre-draft a little bit, but then not really draft as I'm spinning, if that makes sense. I now have a very, very fluffy purple cloud that we can start trying to spin. And the nice thing is that I can, all right, I started with a section that I am able to draft. I just remember, yeah, that sometimes you start, whoop, sometimes you start to hit pieces that you just really, really cannot draft because it just does not want to. So it's a lot of, you know, the stuff will be thick and thin. You can't really change your pieces or change and have consistency very easily. But we are spinning something that was very ropish and felted before. So if your goal is perfect, perfect, perfect singles, you might still be disappointed, but certainly you do not need to throw that felted roving away. And there is a quite thin section. This is not my best example of spinning. I would say this isn't exactly easy. Like I did have to do a lot of prep to get to spin, but I think that we're getting something really nice. This is also not my best example of spinning. Some areas are reasonably draftable, but then all of a sudden you get to a point where like it'll either break because it just won't come, or you just get something way too thick. I'm finding the whole process a lot less frustrating now that I did prep all of this fiber in advance. I think when I was doing this live on the fly, it was a lot harder for me because I was trying to like prep it as I went, and that meant that like I would spin a tiny amount, then I'd have to prep a bunch of fiber, and it was like this back and forth. Whereas this time I decided to just embrace this thick and thin nature and go for it to create something that I think will have like a lot of strength to it. And it's still, you know, really soft and beautiful. The yarns do, like when I overlap them, stick together really nicely. And every once in a while I do get a piece that I can draft a bit, and so that is refreshing. But then on the flip side, I occasionally get pieces that are like way too thin. So there's just a lot of, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily call it sloppy, but I am having a lot of fun. And I think that you can get a really nice one-of-a-kind art yarn from this. Not that I would ever recommend intentionally going and felting your hand-dyed roving so you could make an art yarn. It's just I am finding the positive in it because we're still going to get a really, really workable 2-ply yarn in the end from something that at first look is quote disaster. So it all just depends on how you look at things and decide to proceed. Okay, I am going to keep spinning until my bobbin is full, but once again, I'm really impressed by the fact that I have had very little waste here. You know, yes, it is thick and thin and we've got bumps and really thin places, but I don't think that I had any fiber this time that I had to just say, nope, nope, you are going to the, oh, that's a thick piece, to the cutting room floor. I am able to incorporate everything into my yarn. I just don't have a lot of control over it necessarily, and I'm coming into one of some of the more felted and less managed portions here. But anyway, I could sit and spin and chat with you guys for a really long time, but when this bobbin is full and I've used up all of this fiber, I will come back and we'll take a look at this final single. Here is our yarn. At the very end, we have this piece of clear felted portion, but I sort of left it there for, oh, just some memories. But we have this really thick and thin, pretty interesting yarn. And honestly, I am curious about how it'll come together with the gray yarn that I spun during that live stream. So I'm going to go ahead and try to ply this together, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like. For spinning the gray and purple yarns months apart, I did pretty well getting them at a similar length. This yarn is thick and thin, and you can see that it goes from super bulky to maybe a heavy worsted, or even just a true worsted weight yarn in places. There's, I guess, 1 bobbin and a half filled with our 2-ply, and then I finished off the leftover with just an end-ply, and so really there was not very much of the gray left over, so we were able to use all of our yarn. I would like to give a huge thank you to my friend Liz for dyeing this roving and sending it to me for a surprise mystery spin along. I had a lot of fun, and we learned something really, really important. And that is that all hope is not lost if your roving is felted. You can still come up with a really, really fun, interesting art yarn that is knittable and usable. So it is always important when you are doing any kind of project to try to look for the positive, because no matter what, you can still find something very beautiful in it. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and give the video a like. I have a number of other spinning videos that don't start from felted roving, and I also love to dye roving and yarn in as many different ways as I can think of. And you really don't want to miss a thing. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.